If you want to have a rise in fascism, if you want racism and xenophobia to thrive, you have to convince white working class people that the reason that they're suffering isn't because of a government that hates them and shows them disdain. You tell them that that's not the reason that all of this is happening. It's because black and brown people are here. It's because Muslims are here, don't you know?
Welcome to The Tea, where we stir beneath the surface and ask questions that really matter. I'm your host, Myriam François. Before we get into the episode, I just want to take a tiny moment to ask you to do one thing for me. Hit that subscribe button now. We are a small independent team, no big network, no corporate backing, just a handful of people who care deeply about having honest conversations and shining a light on what often goes unseen or unheard. If our work resonates with you too, click subscribe now and join us on Patreon, link in our bio. Today's guest is more than just a powerhouse. She's a multi-award-winning disruptor, actress, and creative who's been reshaping conversations in Britain for years. Kelechi Okafor is the brilliant mind behind the award-winning podcast Say Your Mind and of the newly released dystopian fantasy novel Awakened. A critically acclaimed author and fearless commentator, Kelechi's words light the way, challenging British institutions, confronting misogynoir, and reimagining Black womanhood on her own terms. Kelechi reminds us that power isn't just something you demand, it's something you embody. From the stage to the studio, from the mic to the page, she's changed the conversation for good. Kelechi, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. I love that intro. Oh my gosh, thank you.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Well, first off, for people who may not know much about your personal background and who've heard all of your accolades, what was it about your personal story that has shaped the kind of work that you do today?
I think being born in Nigeria, moving to England at the age of 5, automatically put me into this position of an observer, observing life. I'm lucky to have moved first to Peckham, southeast London, and there, at the time that I moved there were lots of Yoruba people. I could hear Yoruba everywhere I went. So that helped me to feel a bit grounded, helped me to feel like I had a sense of home. But at the same time, this was a foreign land to me. And I started to observe very quickly so I could figure out how I would fit in. And I guess there was childhood experiences as well, traumas that meant that because I pulled more inwards into myself, I became even more of an observer. And I think when you are kind of at the edge of friendship groups, at the edge essentially of society, you get to notice certain things that other people might not. And then I think later on, as I grew older, then I started wanting to share what I was observing. And it wasn't always clear, it wasn't always necessarily correct or full-bodied. I had to learn that as I kind of went along. And that's how I'm here.
And you write about many things, but I notice obviously spirituality is a big running theme through your work. We live in a culture that doesn't really recognize spirituality as real. I mean, you kind of almost have to hide your spirituality. Mm-hmm. People look down on anyone who has a spiritual tradition. Mm-hmm. Why is spirituality so important to you?
Spirituality for me is important because I feel like it gives you something, hope. You know, I think from a psychological perspective, it gives a lot of people hope. It gives them a broader understanding of the world. It gives a way to connect with other people. I think ultimately, a capitalist society doesn't want us to be spiritual in any way, to embody our spirituality, because it's much easier to control groups of people when they think that all they are is flesh. And that's, you know, once they're gone. Right. And so while you're here, why don't you just buy things? And why don't you just get things to delay your aging? Especially for women, we're constantly told, why don't you buy this anti-aging cream? Why don't you do this? All to avoid the very real reality of death. Right. We don't want to think about that. But I think spirituality actually helps us to have a better relationship with death.
I couldn't agree more. And I think it's the big one. Isn't it funny what a taboo discussions of death are when it's like the one inevitability that we all have to confront, and we hide the dying. Death is taboo, and it's like it's the one thing that we surely probably want to understand better, to be able to confront the thing that we're all coming to at some point, some of us much earlier than others, unfortunately. One of the other things that I notice is you're would you describe yourself as a polymath? I mean, you do many things and you're very successful at many things. And I kind of observed that you have this pole dancing studio.
Yeah.
So you talk about the erotic and the importance of eroticism as power. That's another one that I think about in our society. It's almost like you have to choose as a woman. You're either intellectual or spiritual. You're either intellectual or erotic.
Yeah.
Why is it important for you to kind of capture all of those in your person and not shy away from those parts of you?
I think because it's a tool of specifically white supremacist heteropatriarchy to get us to work in false binaries and these false dichotomies that you can only be one thing or the other thing, when actually so many of us are an amalgamation, a beautiful, chaotic mix of so many different aspects, but we never get to explore it because somebody wants to know, what's your title? What's your title? So I can kind of categorize you in the social strata. Whereas when you are exploring everything that's available to you that you know of, that gives you an opportunity to understand yourself better, you become more powerful. And this is the thing about eroticism as well as death. Those are the places where we are truly free and liberated if we want to be. And so capitalism or white supremacist heteropatriarchy doesn't want you to go in that direction, because to know your true power is to know a freedom that they can't regulate.
And maybe also don't understand. I mean, because obviously female sexual power is something that's been so controlled, right, for so long. And then again, with spirituality that are outside the normative ones, it's like, well, who's controlling that source of power within it? I wanted to ask you about your spiritual tradition, which, if I've understood correctly, is Yoruba astrology?
Yoruba spirituality, yeah. So there are different aspects of it, but I specifically explore the practice of Ifa, and it's an incredible pantheon where we have the deity. So there's this overarching energy that's known as Eledumare, and then you've got the other deities, also known as Orisha, who represent different elements of nature, really, whether it's metal, whether it's the wind, whether it's the rivers. And there are some that rule or co-govern these elements. And moving towards understanding Yoruba spirituality more has opened up my mind and my heart specifically. There's a level of empathy that one is able to feel when you really understand that we are nature. We're not separate to nature. You know, people go, oh, I'm going to go for a walk in nature. Well, you're also nature, but we aren't taught to think about ourselves in that way. We're taught to think about ourselves as separate to nature. And I think that that's one of the most detrimental aspects of our existence currently, and why we have climate injustice, because we are seeing ourselves as separate too, as opposed to an instrumental facet to the ecosystem, and therefore we need to be responsible, accountable for how we operate. And Yoruba spirituality allows that. And what's interesting about Yoruba spirituality, before it got kind of interrupted by British colonialism, is because we don't have Satan. And I think that that's so important when you are looking at the mindset of a people. When there is no evil, there's no external evil. We are accountable for the deeds that we do, and it's up to us to balance it.
I want to ask you about this, I want to say trend, but not in the sense of it being trendy, and more so in the direction of travel. I've observed a lot of people in the decolonial movement returning to this idea of indigenous practices of religion, often meaning a rejection of the kind of monotheistic faiths that may have come through colonialism or expansionism. And I was wondering what you would, first, whether you regard it essential as part of decolonial praxis to rid ourselves of the forms of religion that were brought with colonialism. And that would obviously in parts of the world that were colonized be Islam or Christianity in particular. But also, to what extent do you think that there are parts of that return that idealize the spirituality of indigenous cultures without kind of understanding some of the complexities of them at the time?
Yeah, I think that that's so important, the idealization, the romanticizing of indigenous practices, because historically there were aspects of Yoruba spirituality that, one, I would say that I don't agree with, in terms of the killing of twins or albino people. They would be killed for one reason or another. That makes no sense to me. Like that.
Yeah.
And luckily, from what I know, those practices have stopped, but these things were known to happen.
Yeah.
So I think that when people are returning to Indigenous practices as they see it, they need to understand that there are aspects that we still do need to critique. And why did people think the things that, that this was okay? All of these things are really important. There are certain places currently with their Indigenous practices where they believe in, with trigger warnings in place in raping children because it will cure them of certain diseases. That is monstrous to me. I don't think it's a thing where we can just sit back and say, oh, well, I'm returning to my Indigenous practices because I'm decolonizing my understanding of spirituality. No matter where you go, there isn't one spiritual practice that's going to save you. Like, there's nothing out there that essentially can save us. Only we can save ourselves. And we can only really do that by interrogating our shadow aspects, the deeper part of ourselves, why we think certain things.
I think it's interesting, this notion of like the return to source as being a purified vision, but also, we're still talking about patriarchal cultures.
Yes.
So all those practices are still also imbibed there. And there is a lot of, I suppose, trendiness to this idea of like, I'm rejecting everything that came with the colonizers. It's like, well, nothing was perfect before either,
Nothing
right?
at all. And even this idea of, we've got that trend happening, but we've also got this trend of people going back to organized religion as well, but due to the rise of fascism, because they're looking for certainty, they're looking for structure, and they would probably think that in the spiritual practices that have been previously kind of demonized or villainized to them, that they don't have that same structure. And then I think there are more ways for you to have to face yourself when you're not participating in organized religion. That scares a lot of people, so they run the other way. But I'm seeing an uptick, especially in the I want to call them Instagram baddies, who are suddenly going to church. Do what you want to do. I'm in full support of people going on their spiritual journey to find whatever it is that they're looking for. However, why would they be going back? What have they seen in terms of purity culture and patriarchy that would make them think that this in some way would make me seem more pure, regardless of any of the things that I've posted before? And ultimately it will help me find a man who's going to respect me. But we've seen pastors misbehaving all the time. So you're not guaranteed a good man because you've decided to turn to Jesus.
I obviously also observe this return to, I suppose, particularly within the US, the rise of conservative evangelicals, a return or a rise of puritanical politics. And I find it very interesting that my perception of spirituality or religion is that if it hasn't made you a better person, meaning kinder, more empathetic, more understanding, then you're probably doing it wrong.
Yeah.
Like, what kind of religion are you following that's now making you more hateful towards people?
And that's what I see a lot of, this anti-LGBTQ kind of rhetoric. How is it that you claim to love a God, your God dislikes me? But if God created everyone, then that means that everybody with their sexuality and everything that they are, they were also created by God, and God would know that, right? So why would God create people to then be hated? And I think that people don't sit down enough to think, which kind of God are you talking about? Is it a man-made God, a man-made God that was presented to you as a source of political control, or is it a God beyond that? That is maybe more expansive, that allows you to ask questions, that doesn't ask you to obey.
I want to talk to you now about your recently published novel, Awakened. Now, in it, you talk about a very real issue, which is the disappearance of Black people in the UK, in particular young Black children. Why did you choose to tell this story through fiction?
When I'm making my videos and I'm talking about the things that I'm talking about, people might scroll past. I don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear a Black woman harping onto me about some next sort of societal injustice. But if it's science fiction and I'm just saying that, imagine that young Black people are going missing and their bodies are being found by bodies of water, and the police at the moment of arriving there automatically say there's nothing suspicious about the circumstances around them being found in this way. What if something was happening? What if their souls were being snatched and taken elsewhere? Like, I had to put it that way to get people to suspend disbelief for a moment so they could actually be invested in the characters and care enough, and then get to the author's note and see, oh, actually it has been happening, and what are we going to do about the fact that this is the case. So I've started this form to collate information. I called it Asking the Tides, to get all of the instances where Black people have gone missing and been found by bodies of water, and ask people to contribute to it whenever they would see any of these stories. I think it's important that somebody keeps record of this, because eventually I think that police won't be able to ignore it for much longer.
Which is the current situation. Well, let's maybe, for people who are not from the UK, give a little sense of what the kind of the mood is of the country right now, particularly when it comes to questions of race and racism. We've obviously just come off a decade of Conservative rule, a party that never lost an opportunity to remind us that they had the most diverse cabinet ever, and clearly proof that racism isn't a thing. Now we've got Keir Starmer's Labour government, which hasn't done very much to tackle structural racism, at least not so far, but is very busy attacking civil liberties.
Yes.
And then we have, at the same time, the Reform Party, which is obviously a far-right party that's rising, led by Nigel Farage, openly anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim. So they say all kinds of wild things all the time. And we seem to be following, or at least trying to keep pace actively here in the UK, with America's rapid descent into fascism, fascist authoritarianism. It feels like a long time since the BLM protest, is all I'm going to say.
Yes.
How do you see the state of racial equality in the UK today, and the conversations that we're having about that?
I think that we haven't gotten very far at all. And in fact, controversially, I think that there are Black people who are in positions of relative power, who have quite a lot of visibility, who I feel are behaving like agents of the state, in that they are encouraging people to remain numb, to remain unconscious to what is happening around them and the very real dangers that we are in terms of our civil liberties. People aren't educated enough on our histories globally, and specifically in the UK as it pertains to race and equality in this country. So every fractional win is seen as this is amazing for us. Is it really? Like, how far have we come? I wasn't impressed by what I call the Black Square Summer of 2020. Lots of white people specifically posting these black squares, saying that they're listening and learning, only for us to find 5 years later this massive regression to the alleged listening and learning, because nobody was listening and learning. Instead, people try to throw money at things. And yes, actually do bring money into certain communities so things can be done, but it was done recklessly. And people bought books like Reni Eddo-Lodge's Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. I bet you some people have not read 5 pages of that book. They don't feel the need to, because they did all of the things that would virtue signal that they are good people. And since then, I'm glad that we are seeing that people are marching for Palestine, people are marching for Congo, people are out in the streets doing this. But we've got a Labour government headed up by Keir Starmer that is pushing against our rights to protest. And we don't see this as a problem. Like, we essentially, as whether it's Black people or as a community of different ethnic groups and racial groups, we are sleepwalking over a cliff, and we're not taking that seriously enough. And there are people who are telling us, don't worry about that. You've been given a medal. You're a member of the British Empire, Order of the British Empire. Your ancestors would be so proud. You got to meet the king. This is so wonderful. Things that mean nothing in the grand scheme of things, when people who look just like you are dying on the continent of Africa as a result of what's been done in this country. We haven't gotten very far at all, and people don't like to hear that, because they would rather believe that things are okay. And why is it then that Black women are disproportionately more likely to die during childbirth in comparison to white women? Why is it that you find that Black men and boys are disproportionately stopped and searched and having excessive force used on them by the police? Why is it that you find that there are disproportionately more neurodivergent people in the prison system? The systems that we exist within, it's not just about class, because I find that people who want to remain on the good side of Keir Starmer, even the MPs, will say things like, well, the main issue in this country is class, it's not really race. But why can't both things be true?
Indeed, and that's one of the juxtapositions that we hear a lot, almost as if it's a contrast between you have to choose, it's either a problem with race or it's a problem with class, but like a lot of the working class is also racialized. So it seems like a strange almost duality to create. Why do you think we're creating that sense that it's, one or the other?
Right. And I think that the reason that we're creating that is to, again, this idea of false dichotomies. Like, it's this or it's that. It can't be both. We're not asked enough to critically think in this country. We're not asked to experience and to practice nuance. Like, not everything is literally black and white. Like, there is this grey area, and that's where a lot of these things kind of live. And we aren't taught to explore that enough. We need to have very extremist thinking. So even when people refer to, oh, you must be a leftist, you must be... I'm just here. I'm just somebody with, I hope, a lot of common sense, and I want better for us collectively as humanity. Why don't you want that? Why do we have to push it into these different systems so you can categorize someone and you can choose not to listen? You're going to have to listen because there are crossovers in different areas. But I think ultimately, it's disgusting, for instance, what's happening with Diane Abbott. And I think Diane Abbott is the perfect example, really, of what we need to understand about the Black woman's experience in the UK, because she has risen to a relatively high position as the longest serving female MP. She's risen to a relatively high position, yet she is being humiliated constantly. She's being verbally attacked constantly. We had that Tory donor,
Yes, Frank Hester,
who said that he, imagined causing her harm. And this was okay. And in fact, the Labour Party sent out emails saying, and there's no place for racism in this country. And what was said was horrible. Meanwhile, Diane Abbott was still suspended at the time of that email being sent.
Well, let's get into some of that, shall we, in just a second. But before we do, just because I'm conscious that there might be people watching who don't know, what the climate here is here in the UK. You mentioned, the sort of choices that were being made to select from. You're either, fighting the race issue or you're fighting the class issue, as if somehow those are not connected. But I'm also conscious that there is the rise of a sort of ideological outlook that says, actually, Britain has overcome structural racism. Kemi Badenoch, first Black woman elected as the head of the Conservative Party here in the UK, celebrated by the right as, a measure of the advancement. She herself has said in 2021, we do not believe that there is systemic racism in the UK. It's wrong to conflate the experience of ethnic minorities with the existence of structural racism. And alongside people like Kemi, who are saying these things, sort of confirming the government's line that there's no such thing as structural racism, we also have the rise of political scientists like Matthew Goodwin, who will argue that actually the people who today are suffering the most forms of discrimination are the white working class.
Yeah, the white working class men.
I find that juxtaposition also very interesting, because it's again almost like as if it's a war within the working class, as if the interests of white working class people don't also align with the interests of Black or brown working class people. So why do you think that we are seeing this sense of race no longer being the main issue when it comes to minorities, and this reframing of white people as actually being the real minorities that are in need of, government support and schemes to assist them?
Because it's age-old propaganda. There's nothing new. The thing about white supremacy is that it's not imaginative. It only uses what it's the tools that it's always known. And if you want to have a rise in fascism, if you want racism and xenophobia to thrive, you have to convince white working class people that the reason that they're suffering isn't because of a government that hates them and shows them disdain and strategically and systematically keeps them from having things and having resources, or making the resources so finite that then it has to be, people have to fight for it. You tell them that that's not the reason that all of this is happening. It's because black and brown people are here. It's because Muslims are here, don't you know? And they're going to take your women. They're going to do this. They're going to take your jobs. They're going to do all of these things. That's who you should be worried about. And also because the education system doesn't actually, the curriculum doesn't teach us enough about the true depravity of Britain, all the things that were committed, the atrocities that were committed globally in order to make Britain great. We're not taught enough about all of those things. So the average, maybe the average white working class man doesn't realize these things. And so they are then kind of reared, groomed for hatred and to have this myopic view that the reason that they don't have is because of everybody else, as opposed to that's when they should think about class, that it's really the upper class that is keeping you from having the things that you rightly deserve, because ultimately there is enough for all of us, and yet we're not having access to it because of the elite. And so the crumbs that we do get, it's like, well, you must fight amongst each other to have these things. And you mentioned Kemi Badenoch. She is a very interesting person to me. In fact, she's one of my favorite people actually in Britain, because she's a clear example of how no matter how much you assimilate to extremist culture, to right-wing propaganda and right-wing rhetoric, you'll never really be celebrated. They're not celebrating her. They ridicule her all the time. And when they're actually serious, when the Conservative Party is actually serious about running for government again, she will be ousted. They will not want to be represented by a black woman, no matter how well she's doing her braids now. They're not going to take her seriously. For anybody to go out and to say things that they must know to be untrue, because they are well educated enough to know that those things are untrue, to go out and say that knowing that they're going to put people in harm's way, you have to be a deeply, deeply fractured person in your soul to do such.
And I mean, the current rhetoric is the idea that there is a polarization happening in the country, that, you know, communities are increasingly divided. And a recent report says that nearly a third of adults in the UK rarely or never interact with people from different backgrounds. And many feel isolated even within their own communities. I'm curious about whether you feel that that is a reflection of reality, because I find, I mean, for sure, we're less connected because we're all online and not connected in real life. That's a kind of general situation. But in terms of connecting with people of different backgrounds, I mean, have you been to a school lately? I just don't, how is that possible? And then when I'm hearing about polarization, I think to myself, who's polarizing who? Who's driving polarization in this country?
We are in London, so sometimes we don't see what's happening in the rest of the country. And when I get to go to different parts of the UK, I realize that, yeah, it's not as cute as what we've got going on here. And, you know, we like to talk about Britain or whatever being a multicultural country. We're not. It's not multicultural. It's multi-ethnic. There are lots of, you know, different ethnicities here, but we have one culture that we are all meant to kind of move with and to uphold. And when we deviate from that, we might get to sometimes for novelty, like, oh, let's celebrate Eid and let's celebrate Diwali. But any other time, I hate those people. Like that's what's presented to us. It's a weird kind of mind game that's not fair at all. We only get these pockets of time to be respected, and outside of that, don't you dare mention your differences in any way. When I think about loneliness and the way that it's presented, basically the media class have a lot to answer for, I mean, in terms of the mainstream media, because they present us news in a way that is so surface level that they don't care to delve deeper. Yes, people aren't mixing with other cultures and people, but as you said, they're also not mixing with people within their cultures, because there is a deep loneliness that people are experiencing collectively and nobody wants to talk about it. We've got a major mental health crisis in this country, and I think that primarily, apart from all of the other things that have happened throughout history, primarily it's because of 2020. People were faced with their own mortality. Every day you would turn on the news and you would see the death toll. We know that in terms of domestic violence and abuse, child abuse, all of these things, all of these stats went up during lockdown. Where are those people? Who's helping them? So many people had to face death, like full on. And it was just like, oh, eat out to help out. You can go outside now. You can go outside, go and have a great time now. Nothing beats a Jet2 holiday. Like now people are outside, but I can tell when I talk to people, when I look at people, there is an emptiness to them. There is an emptiness behind their eyes because nobody has sat down to say, whew, what the hell was that?
We never processed it.
Nope.
We didn't process it as a culture. And so interestingly now, maybe a lot of what's happening also in terms of these inflamed racial politics that are center stage in the country are on the backdrop of a sort of wider malaise, which gets conflated with those issues, I guess is also what you're saying here. And so to return to your point about Diane Abbott, so for people who aren't familiar with Diane Abbott, she is one of the longest standing politicians in the Labour Party. Yeah. She was, a key figure alongside Jeremy Corbyn in a sort of more, I would say, more left-leaning wing of the Labour Party. I know, shocking, because Labour's meant to be left-wing, but not so much. Diane has been in some hot water recently because she was suspended from the Labour Party after doubling down on comments that she basically had already made 2 years ago, in which she kind of said something that, I'll be honest, sounds pretty obvious to me. So I'm just going to put it out there that I don't quite get it. But this is what she said. She said, clearly, there must be a difference between racism, which is about color, and other types of racism, because you can see a traveler or a Jewish person walking down the street. You don't know, aka you don't know that they're Jewish or a traveler. If you see a black person walking down the street, you see straight away that they're black. There are different types of racism. I just think that it's silly to try and claim that racism, which is about skin color, is the same as other types of racism. I don't know why people would say that. I mean, what do you make of her comment, first off?
I think Diane Abbott's comments interesting because, again, it's not inaccurate, it's just incomplete. Race isn't particularly about skin color only, right? Not everybody who was white was invited into whiteness straight away. And so that's why when we say, oh, it's purely about skin color, not necessarily, Italians, Irish people, they weren't invited into whiteness immediately because whiteness is an ideology. So really, yes, we're talking about race and we have to look at different types of racism. But what we're looking at is the construct, the ideology of race that says that those who are darker skinned, which I guess what she's trying to say, will be treated a particular way, but not necessarily everybody who's white or who's white-skinned gets invited into whiteness. And we see how that plays out when we're seeing how other white-skinned people from different parts of Europe are treated in Britain. So I get that. And I guess what she's saying is that, well, you wouldn't see that straight away when you're looking at them. You would see it when you're more looking at black people.
But when we talk about specifically the comments that Diane has made, she's making a distinction, right, between prejudice, which is, I guess in this context, a form of negative views about someone that doesn't have implications for their life outcomes, and racism, which is structural, right? I think that's what she's alluding to. And that was also what she'd said, because these were similar to comments she made about 2 years ago. Do you not think that that's an important distinction between prejudice and racism when we talk about the, let's get real, the amount of money spent on combating them? One type of racism impacts your life chances. The other, some nasty words, not nice, but doesn't mean that you'll end up in prison or poverty or failing at school.
So racism, for me, my understanding of it is that it's a combination of prejudice and discrimination, right? It's an amalgamation of both things. She's totally right. I see it happen every day. Just like I mentioned, black women being more likely to die during childbirth in comparison to white women, or black people, black men and boys being disproportionately stopped and searched or being overrepresented in the prison system. And it's interesting to me that when you call these things out, just in the way that Diane Abbott has, that you'll have the leader of the party, the prime minister, turn around and say, you're being racist. She's not saying anything wrong at all.
So why is she really being targeted then?
because that's what Britain does. We are not meant to ever talk about racism. So whoever dares to talk about racism, regardless of the position that they have, or anti-Black racism specifically, if they dare to talk about it, they will be ridiculed and villainized in a way so as to get them to stop and to take their power away from them. If you want to take power away from people, make people laugh at them. And that's ultimately what they're trying to do, make people laugh at Diane Abbott so she backs down, so she gets worn out. Some of our biggest voices, or our most prominent, powerful voices in the Black community throughout the decades have died from being worn out by this system. So that shows us that going out as individuals isn't going to solve it. We need to come together more in order to be able to tackle this. And they're targeting Diane Abbott because, like I said, she is relatively one of the most powerful Black figures in the UK. So if you can ridicule her, what chance does anybody else have?
Part of the reason that recognizing what racism is about tackling the ways in which it impedes people in our society from fully enjoying their rights, right? So we know that, people of, Black people, brown people, overrepresented at every level in the worst situations, in poverty, in poor housing, in the prison system, in unemployment figures, in poor health. That is not the same for the Jewish community. That is not the same for the Irish community in this country. And when we put everyone in the same bracket, we treat it as if all of those types of prejudice or discrimination are the same. And we might assume that they all deserve to be given as much attention. And attention is money in this situation. But I don't understand personally how we're equating the two. Jewish people in this country make up 0.5% of the population, but around 71% of Jewish people live in households that own their own home. I mean, I don't have the stats to mind for the Black community in the UK, but I can pretty much guarantee that we're not talking about a majority of people owning their own homes. In education, 61% of the Jewish community had achieved a level 4 qualification or higher. In the labor market, a significant proportion of British Jews are employed in high-skilled professions. In contrast, despite only making up around 15% of the population, more than a quarter of those in deep poverty are from a Black and minority ethnic background. How are these the same?
They're not. We know that they're not. The whole point of it is being able to wield power and to gaslight people en masse. The fact of the matter is, a major tenet of capitalism is anti-Black and brown racism. For capitalism to remain, for Britain to thrive, Black and brown people must remain in a particular area of society. They must not have access to certain things to make having those things worthwhile. The moment we have access to it, then those things are no longer worthwhile. So it's not in Britain's interests, as these governments would see it. It's not in Britain's interest to see these things as similar, or to identify that disproportionately these groups of people, these groups of racially minoritized people, are being treated extremely differently, because to acknowledge that would mean that that needs to change. Money needs to be directed that way, and that would cause equality. And equality doesn't benefit Britain in the way that the government see it currently at all. It doesn't benefit capitalism.
Do you connect this at all also to the fact that the narrative that is ongoing to justify the genocide in Gaza is about the idea that the Jewish community are victims not just of profound anti-Semitism here, but also of, if you read the headlines of some of the Israeli papers, an alleged genocide of their own right now. Now, of course, the Jews were subject to a genocide in Europe that killed millions of people during the Second World War. But that was quite a long time ago now. That is not what's happening right now. Today, Jewish Israelis are engaged in the genocide of the Palestinian people, both in Gaza and more broadly also now in the West Bank. And to what extent do you connect this unwillingness to distinguish anti-Semitism from wider forms of racism as part of trying to provide a shield for the ongoing support to that government that we see in this country?
Yeah, I think it goes beyond Israeli Jews. All of this is a massive colonial project between Europe and America getting together to say that this is what we're going to do. And I think that those who are aware can see that they must support the plight, they must fight for the freedoms of the Palestinian people, those who are aware, who might fall into those categories, they see it. But the people who don't see it, it's because they're playing their part and being fodder, essentially, in this massive colonial project. It isn't for them. You know, Uganda was considered before Palestine. Uganda was, considered. So many different countries were considered, but they said, this one. And there was a reason. When we think about the genocide that Jewish people experienced in Europe, which was abhorrent, before that was Namibia, right? And so it's interesting to me how we, at every juncture, we ignore when these same things have happened to people who are darker skinned or who are of a different religion that doesn't fit with the ideologies of Europe and America and what it packages and sells out to the world. So it isn't a surprise that the same conflation of anti-Semitism, anti-Black and brown racism that we're seeing in the UK is playing out. And it's the reason that justifications are being made for the genocide, the clear genocide that's taking place in Palestine. It's not surprising to me because it is a massive colonial project. And after they finish there, if we let them finish, which would be horrendous and horrific if we let them finish there, it's only going to be somewhere else. And so when we hear nobody's free if Palestine's not free, right? Nobody's free while anybody's unfree, right? If we do not take that into account, if we do not really embody that mindset, if we do not truly understand that truth, then none of us have a chance.
In just a few weeks, Notting Hill Carnival will be happening here in London. It'll be packed with over 1 million people for the annual festivities. For our international audience who may not know about what Carnival is and why it's so important to London, can you tell people why Carnival is such an incredible celebration?
Notting Hill Carnival specifically is so special because it initially started as a protest, right? And to, again, racism that was being experienced by the Black communities, specifically in West London. And to push back against this, Notting Hill Carnival was born. And so we are thankful to Claudia and the people who got together to say that this is what we're going to have as a celebration. And throughout the years, it's grown and grown and grown. And when we think about West London historically, it was a place where we had a lot of people from Jamaica and from the Caribbean that, they were living there. And it wasn't seen as like, okay, this is where, rich white people necessarily want to go and live in the specific area that they were living in. And over time, it became more desirable. And then suddenly all the criticisms began. All the criticisms began when middle to upper class people decided that they wanted to live in Notting Hill, especially after the film. They decided that they wanted to live around that area. Then it was just like, well, should Carnival be happening? There's so much violence. There's so much drug use. There's so much of all of these things. Essentially, there are just way too many Black people around here. And we don't want this inconvenience because for one day in a year or, for that weekend in a year rather, we have to leave our homes or board up our homes, and we couldn't ever imagine actually participating. And so there has been this war on Notting Hill Carnival ever since then, and it's really sad to see.
Now, you mentioned the kind of criminalization of the festival, and media investigations have shown that actually the arrest rates at Notting Hill Carnival are almost identical to Glastonbury.
Oh, really?
Fancy that.
Wow.
Suggesting that maybe these controversial crime narratives are pretty misplaced. We have heard, however, that the Met is planning to use live facial recognition at this year's event. That didn't happen at Glastonbury.
No.
Is this really about safety? Do you feel safer attending Carnival with live facial recognition around?
Not at all. Not at all. It comes back to the over-policing of racially minoritized communities in the UK. We're seeing these facial recognition vans from the police in more areas now. I'm seeing them in Brixton, I'm seeing them in Peckham, I'm seeing them in Elephant and Castle. These are areas that are known to have more racially minoritized people of who are working class. They would likely be in these areas. The police earlier on this year, the Met Police had to get rid of the gang matrix, right? And erase the database that they kept, which was deemed to be essentially unlawful because it was racist. It disproportionately held information about Black men and boys who were put there because it was said that they were most likely to be involved in gang activities. Now, the thing is, the Met Police was adding these people, Black men and boys, to this database if they've ever been stopped and searched, even if nothing came of it. The fact that they were stopped and searched, which they are more likely to be because they're Black men and boys, they were added to this database, and the database was shared privately with public authorities. So that meant that if you tried to apply for housing and you didn't get housing, or suddenly your child was pulled out of school, or you couldn't get your driving license renewed, it was likely because this information was shared that you knew nothing about.
Wow.
So they had to erase the database. And the reason I bring that up is because they had to get rid of the gang matrix. They have to find another way to be able to collate information about racially minoritized people in this country. So facial recognition is perfect for that, because currently, from what I understand, when we think about technology, the exponential growth of technology as we know it across the globe, our human rights, legislations haven't caught up with that. So that means that there's this kind of opening, this pocket of time where different authorities, different bodies can gather as much data as they want, because there's no one to regulate whether that's fair or not, because we're not consenting to that. Some might say, well, we're not consenting to all the CCTV that's around either, but there is an understanding of why that's there, because we know that CCTV is around most of the UK, while London having a lot of it. But why is it that it's only specific events that we're finding facial recognition being used? Because it's about getting more details and information about racially minoritized people.
I think it's really interesting. Two points on that. One is the idea that the more you read into those technologies, the more it's also clear that they're really bad at identifying Black and brown faces, right? That they're actually incompetent at distinguishing. And so I think to myself, is this kind of like a testing thing? And then the other one is that actually what we are really saying is that surveillance technologies are being wielded on working class communities who are most likely to be those who will be contesting, increasingly difficult conditions in the UK for working class communities. And so under the pretext of this wider assumption of Black criminality, we are justifying the over-policing and the over-surveillance of effectively working class people in a way that can and may well be rolled out to suppress the rights of even wider numbers of people. And so I want to connect that to something. So, recent legislation here, the Crime and Policing Bill, which is viewed very much by civil liberty groups as an attack on our rights here in the UK. In the US, we saw how the NYPD facial recognition tools had been used to identify pro-Palestinian student protesters after being tested out in Palestine prior to that and taught to the NYPD by the Israelis. Beyond this, we are seeing these forms of spyware being used, to monitor refugees and migrants. I mean, to what extent do you think that these communities are being used as a testing ground, whether that's Black people here, whether that's migrants in Greece, whether that's, Palestinians in Israel, as a testing ground for forms of surveillance that will ultimately be used to suppress dissent here at home, which incidentally is growing?
That's all it ever is. Nothing is being done with our best interest at heart. Ultimately, we are moving to a situation where we are going to be hyper surveilled. And then we've got this idea of this one card that has all of our information
The
on
brick
it.
card.
Yeah, that has all of our information on it. And it's interesting. My first book, Edge of Here, which was a short story collection, I introduced the idea of the ally chip, and which was a chip that people would get inserted into their brains that was meant to help you feel the feelings of somebody else who was in close proximity to you. So you'd have the host and the donor. So the idea was that the chip was meant to combat racism, because it would allow you to feel the feelings of a black person experiencing racism. Only that white people then started giving themselves awards for feeling the feelings, and then they said it was too much. Like, they started experiencing ally chip fatigue. Essentially, it didn't solve racism, so they had to repurpose the chip, and it became known as the homeostay chip, which would measure homeostasis. And, you know, if you were ill, you can't go to certain places, you have to stay away. And a private company then develops an app called Uterus Star. And if you look after your uterus, you exercise, you eat well, you get points. And our protagonist, Aaliyah, she gets all of these points and she becomes Uterus Star of the Month. And when you become Uterus Star of the Month, you get taken to a paradise island, and it's wonderful. Only it's not a paradise island. It's a facility to artificially inseminate people with sperm, the people with uterus or uteri, to inseminate them with sperm so the white race doesn't die out. And I wrote that I started writing that the day that Roe v. Wade was overturned, because as far as I'm concerned, this isn't just surveillance of black and brown people or working class people. Essentially, it's going to, as you say, it's going to hit everyone, but not really, if I'm thinking about it correctly, not really upper class men, right? Especially not really upper class white men. Women, though, across the board, they're going to get it, especially as it comes to as it pertains to reproductive rights, because then there are different ways of kind of like monitoring what does your face look like when you're ovulating, what changes are there, like different things. It's going to be so intricate, it's going to be so kind of extensive what will be surveilled, that we will be shocked. And if we don't contest it now, if we don't all start pushing against it now, even people that think, oh, it's never going to get to me, it's absolutely going to get to you. And then what do we do? So it's part of a larger project where essentially we are having cameras recognizing our faces everywhere. Then the brick card is scoring us, right, and keeping all of this information. It kind of reminds me of that Black Mirror episode as well, where that's what it will be. We'll have these cards that are tracking our every movement through surveillance technology, and we will be denied things based on what is being contained or what is being kind of collated about us.
And of course, in China, that's already the
Exactly.
case, right? So you'll be denied access to housing or certain jobs if your score is too low. I also want to ask you about the filters that we're all now using, right? So these days, whether it's TikTok, Instagram, all of them really are encouraging us to use filters and effects to change how our faces look. But those filters also collect a lot of biometric data about users' faces. And this data helps build the facial recognition tech. So TikTok has admitted that it's actually used its own data to spy on reporters in the past. Now, not to sound like the representatives from the US TikTok Congress circa 2023, but should we be concerned about this?
We should absolutely be concerned, but some people are too far gone. If we're not concerned for ourselves, this is my thing. Some of us as adults, too far gone. Especially me, I make so many videos, not with filters per se, but I make so many videos now that they must have my face from every which way. Fine. Our children, though, we have a responsibility to the young people to not let them get taken in, and all of their data and their all of that to be taken in for them. I think about the fact that when I saw Reels becoming more popular and I saw TikTok videos becoming more popular, I remember saying to my audience on social media, I said, this is because they're learning our faces. They're learning our faces to make AI more believable, as well as obviously to have all of this biometric data on us. And because, again, our human rights kind of protections aren't in place yet fully when it comes to this. Everybody's having a field day currently. And now they're encouraging us to make longer videos so they can get every single expression. And somebody pointed out to me quite rightly, that it's also because we're talking. So the cadence, our voices as well, that's also being taken in. So we're thinking that it's just facial recognition for certain things, but also our voices will come in handy at some point. So I've covered my face, but I'm at a protest and I shout something, right? Ideally, is eventually you're going to be able to get people's voices as well and track them in that way. We're giving away so much. And this also does correlate with the rise in ancestry information and giving your DNA over to find your, your long lost grandparents or to discover more about your family tree. We're also handing in that data as well in terms of our DNA. Everything is everything, quite literally.
We literally are the product. Last month, on a slightly different note, Jamaica announced that they are planning to push King Charles to get legal advice about whether Britain should pay reparations for slavery. Between the 17th and 19th century, Britain shipped around 600,000 enslaved Africans to Jamaica. For years, the UK has expressed what it calls, quote unquote, deep sorrow for slavery. It hasn't apologized, though, and there's no current talks of reparations. Why have we not had an apology?
We haven't had an apology because an apology would be to admit fault. And if you admit fault, then you have to make that right. You have to do something to make that right to the person that you have wronged or the people that you have wronged. And that would cost Britain a lot of money. So there is a strategized, like a deeply strategized attempt to not ever use the word sorry or to be seen to apologize in any way. So any monarch or any royal that's gone out to represent Britain is very careful about not saying words like sorry and they'll say to you it was a deeply regretful time and we feel deep sorrow for what happened, but absolutely not sorry, because sorry comes with pound signs.
Now, that's interesting because reparations were paid, but they were paid to the slave owners for their loss of property. And we, taxpayers in the UK, we were paying for that until 2015 when that debt was eventually paid off. So reparations have technically been paid, but just to the slave owners. At a Cambridge debate recently, you said, in paying my taxes, I was effectively paying my own enslavers. I would like my money back.
Yes.
Fair enough. Do you see any hope for a reparations conversation in this country?
Not anytime soon, because Britain, just wouldn't want it. In terms of the government, they wouldn't want it. And there are smart ways that we can go around thinking about how we can pay reparations. But it's a not wanting to. It comes back to the Diane Abbott conversation. It's not that it's not possible. Everybody knows that this is what would be, that is recourse. It's what you should do. We know this. Just no, because it would make things equal. And that is of no benefit to a white supremacist heteropatriarchal structure.
And what's really interesting about what you're saying is that we also know that reparations does actually work really well at repairing and equalizing where an injustice has been done. So, for example, Germany has paid over $90 billion in reparations to Holocaust survivors globally. Rightly so. As a result, today in the UK, 61% of British Jews had a higher level qualification in 2018. Among Jewish people in employment, 46% were employed in high skill occupations in England and Wales. I could go on. The point is, today, the Jewish community is among the wealthier sections of British society. Good for them. But that is not disconnected, surely, from the fact of this receipt of reparations. So if we acknowledge the necessity to pay reparations to Holocaust survivors, and I do think we should, and absolutely. It was right to do that, due to the anti-Semitism, of course, that they faced and their own extermination, why exactly are we distinguishing this from reparations to descendants of slavery? Since apparently, according to the Labour Party, we're not allowed to distinguish between racisms. I thought Diane Abbott got punished for that.
Yes.
So if they're all the same, I'm just confused. Why does one group get the reparations and others don't?
Black people aren't deemed fully human. Like, that is the real conversation that's taking place. So we should be grateful, in fact, that we are even conflated and everyone put together in the same kind of categorization of racism. Because when we needed to have it with political blackness historically as well. We needed to come together with Asian people, South and East Asian, come together with different people who are also racially minoritized in this country in order to be seen and to have some kind of say and power. And then eventually we had it with political blackness. We had it with the term BAME. It's like for blackness to be considered and black people to be considered in any way, they have to group up with other racially minoritized people or other minoritized people or marginalized folk that the government see as fully human, ultimately. And so interestingly, as you mentioned, Germany paying over 90 billion, right? What did they pay to Namibia in comparison? Hardly anything. If we're comparing those in terms of money, hardly anything for those atrocities that Namibians are still living through today. Even when we consider epigenetics, people having our cells change as a result of trauma. We know this, right? And so there is a type of trauma that has not yet stopped. We can't be, when we talk about Black people, through my experience, we can't even talk about post-traumatic stress disorder because racism is constant, every day, persistent, every day. So I'm not even post the trauma, I'm constantly living it. So where is the kind of buffer for that?
Right. And just to cement your point, the exact number that was paid by Germany to Namibia was 1.1 billion, as opposed to the $90 billion paid to Jews for the harm caused to them during the Holocaust. So, clearly a disparity there. We just talked about the absence of reparations, and it's interesting to note that the royal family in this country are one of the biggest landowners. Mm-hmm. I always find it interesting how little public information is shared about the extent to which we continue to live in essentially a form of feudal system in this country, where we're all basically paying to exist to these huge landowners, of which, incidentally, I discovered in doing research for this, that the royal family aren't even the biggest. They are not even the biggest landowners in this country. There are other aristocratic families who own more land than they do. Yes, indeed.
Across the globe or just here?
Here in the UK.
Wow, okay.
Which I think is very interesting and very telling, actually, about the systems of power that operate very, very silently, very covertly, very under the surface. So you've been very vocal about your call to abolish the monarchy. You don't believe in the monarchy. What is it about the royal family that you are so opposed to?
I just think that if we are saying that we are a society that rates ourselves in any form whatsoever, why should we have a family that, from how we understand it through the divine rights of kings, they deserve to be there just because of the bloodline that they were born into? And not just that, but they get to siphon off all the money that we make. We're paying for them to exist. We're giving them this money. Meanwhile, I'm seeing so many people experiencing homelessness. I'm seeing an NHS that's on its knees. We definitely need more social housing. We need to kind of bolster our education system, so it's not just those who are paying for private education that get an extensive and robust education. We've got so many things that we need to be worrying about. Why is our money going to a family that don't deserve it, that don't need it? Why? And they have so many properties as well, and yet they get to have all of this access to our money, but we don't get to know very much about them. They get to choose which laws that they participate in. The monarch, the reigning monarch, can't ever be arrested. Interesting to me. Why is it that anybody should be considered above anybody else? That's my standard premise. Right. I don't believe that anybody should be seen as above anybody else, and you sure as hell cannot be seen to be above me when I'm paying for you to be there. So something's got to give.
Well, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts, therefore, on the fact that it seems that we're moving from this traditional form of feudalism, which is like, obviously we are us commoners, we pay our dues to the lords for the right to exist on this fair land, into a form of, I guess you could say, tech feudalism today. Do you see any continuities between that sort of historical form of feudalism under the monarchy and the types of tech feudalism that we're moving into that you might want people to be aware of?
To me, tech feudalism, the feudalism that we know in terms of the monarchy, it's all the same thing. We have been indoctrinated, we have been poisoned even from the womb and beyond to believe that we don't have much power, when actually the power has always been with us, and we are giving away our power constantly, whether it's to the technocracies, whatever the case is, we keep doing it. Whereas we know that if we just push back a little bit and said, no, you don't have access to this, we don't want to give you access to this, they would have to honor that, because there is so much less of them than of us. But we don't rate ourselves enough because we've become infected by celebrity culture. Although I see the culture and the cult of celebrity crumbling, it's not crumbling quickly enough for me. And so people are always looking for somebody else to look up to, as opposed to looking up to themselves.
So interesting. You know, I have a friend visiting from the States right now, and before she left the US, she left her real phone behind. She obviously uses a burner phone to travel, like a lot of people do. She also will not attend any events here in the UK related to Palestine because she's concerned about tracking. And we had a conversation about how quickly people are accommodating to fascism. And I really find it disturbing how quickly we have just gone, oh yeah, you know, there's fascists in government, we just won't travel with our own phone. Or like, we'll just be careful where we go. As opposed to, hell no. Hell no, I am not changing my phone. I am not going to go somewhere because you're going to track it because your fascist government won't allow me to. How are so many people, Kelechi, accepting to conform to fascist politics? Because they might say that they oppose them, but what they actually do is they accommodate their lives to it. And we're all doing it, increasingly so. And I really fear that we're going to wake up one day held deeply by the throat by the fascists and just go, how did we get here? And we got here because when they said don't travel with your phone, you just got out the burner.
Yeah.
That's where it started.
It's because of trust. We don't trust each other. We don't have co-conspirators. I can't trust that if they come for me, that you are all gonna ride out for me and you're going to tear things down in my name. Like you're not going to you're gonna show them that I have so much value that you're not going to tolerate. Like you will burn everything down if they don't let me go. Right? We don't trust each other enough to do that, because actually you'll be like, no, I'm really sorry that they took you, but I've got work on Monday.
Right.
So we don't have it. So everything still comes back to community. If we do not start coming out of our shells, the shells that they've encouraged us to go into, this idea of hyper-individualism, that all you've got is you've got nobody else. If we do not start learning, practicing how to trust each other, even when we don't necessarily like each other for whatever reason, if we don't start learning how to trust and mobilize in a deeper way, not just when we're out marching, but in a deeper way where we are communal, where we are sharing resources with each other, whether that's bread. I mean, I know we've got the food banks, we've got these things. It needs to go even harder than that. If we are not willing to be uncomfortable so we can understand that I am my sister and my brothers, I am my siblings' keeper, if we are not willing to go that far, then when we don't have any chance at this, because they know that the thing that we fear is that, well, if they take me, nobody's going to ride out for me, and then they can torture me and do all sorts, and then I'm gone, I'm another martyr. That's it, right? So the only way to do this is to start practicing trust with people, having uncomfortable conversations, not these surface conversations like, oh, so what's the weather like today then? Starting to learn different ways to have the conversations that help us build trust, so that we know that if we need to, there are so many of us that will do what's necessary. And we don't yet know that, because actually not all skin folk are kinfolk. That's what I'm learning as a Black woman, that for all of the things that I do, some of my biggest detractors and biggest critics happen to be women who look like me, because they're like, why are you doing this? We've only just gotten access to these things. Why don't you just enjoy it? Why are you making such a fuss? You're so angry. But in me, they see the parts in them that they are ignoring, and eventually they're going to have to join me, because as you say, one day they're going to wake up held up like this and they'll wonder how they got there, but it's because they were trying to stop me holding me in little ways from saying the things that need to be said.
And it's always this kind of lure that we're given of like proximity to power or wealth, because obviously at the center of empire, that's what's dangled, right? They dangle it to us. It's like, well, just shh, you might get the promotion.
Yeah.
Shh, if you do that, you might get invited to the party.
You'll get invited to the palace, quite literally. There are people who aren't saying things because it's like, but I want to, be invited to the palace. What do you want to go and see there? What is so important about seeing there? Are you going to help Charles get those rings off his fingers? No. So why are you going there? There's nothing. It's just draconian, antiquated pomp and ceremony. But because we have been indoctrinated to believe that that is one of the highest achievements you can have in this land, people want it. They want it so badly, as opposed to realizing that all of this is made up. They're just wearing fancy clothes and they've got nothing to show for it.
Last question to you, because you have written about transhumanism and there's a lot of talk about this sort of transhuman trend. Obviously, whether it's the chip that Elon's really keen on, or it's, the glasses that are now, I'm actually seeing people walking around with. We are seeing this sort of drive towards an integration of man and the machine. And you've even featured humanoid characters in your book. Given what we're seeing, how do you maintain hope in the tech? Because I have to say, I just see it all as like quite scary developments, because I see rich racist people pushing tech on us in a way that I don't see like anyone that I think, oh, thank God you're in the play.
Yeah.
So how do you maintain hope about the potential for tech at this time when it seems to be driven by such obnoxious, racist, eugenics-driven folk?
I just think it's one of those things where we have a chance to infiltrate and interrupt it now. Learning the things that we need to learn now. The thing is, in terms of coding and all of that, there are free resources that allow those who are interested to really start learning how to create similar things. So I think that DeepSeek really put a spanner in the works when they were just like, well, we're just going to give everybody this for free. What are you going to do now? And immediately they had to try and contain it, right? Because there is a way that this can be done where the people who have the expertise, who have worked in these industries, can essentially make it accessible for other people so we can start impacting what's happening. So yeah, in my novel Awakened, there is a humanoid character called Jeremy Bromwich who's running for mayor of London. He's AI, but he's got like fleshy synthetic material that makes his skin and stuff, and he smells great. And the protagonist, Pels, asks him, well, you're a machine, right? So you don't have a soul, you don't have a conscience, you don't have a soul. And don't you think that you would need one for governance? And he says, well, fair enough, I don't. I'm made of wires. But how far has having a soul allegedly gotten your government so far? And it's something that we have to think about.
Touché.
Right? It's like, we know that because of those who are programming, who have the money to create these things, the tech will be as racist as they are. Right? But if there is a way that we can somehow infiltrate this, then we have a fighting chance at changing our climate for the better and for providing for each other in a way that is just and equitable. We have a way of being able to do this because we essentially have more manpower because we have robots to help. That's if it's done well. As with anything, it's how you use it. Fire can be used to cook your food, or it can have other implications, as we know as well, in terms of burning things down. It just depends on how you're wanting to use these things. When I think about people like Peter, though, and Elon and Trump and Nigel Farage, all of these people, I mean, Nigel Farage doesn't have their money. He's miserable. But when I think about them as a whole, I think that they're all actually miserable. They're deeply unhappy men, deeply unhappy, insecure men who have access to a lot of wealth, and they're making everybody else pay for that which they find inadequate in themselves. And if they want to go to the moon, if they want to attach a robot head to themselves, go for it. You're still going to be miserable and you're still going to be unattractive. So that's something that nothing can save you from. There's no amount of biohacking that's going to make you less of a monster than you are. You're ugly, right? And so these are the things that they don't realize, and that's what they're really trying to overcome. So badly, a lot of the guys in the tech world want to be the popular jock. And they're realizing that no matter how much money that they have, they can't achieve that. And they're making everybody else suffer in the process. So I'm interested in their projects and what they're trying to do. Again, it comes back to us not glamorizing them, not romanticizing them. We know that Jeff has a very big interest in immortality, from what he invests in and the companies that he has in terms of cryogenic freezing and things like that. They really want to live on. And I don't understand why, because they're not making much of their life right now. So I don't know where we go with them. But I do know that if we can use the tech that's available, that we have access to currently, and we start using it in more transformative ways, which actually there are people who are. I know that there are some Black women trailblazers that I wrote about recently who are trying to interrupt what's being done, the detrimental effects of artificial intelligence. They're trying to get ahead of it. If we can support that and look at what do we actually want, because ultimately the reason I'm hopeful about AI and technology as a whole is because what do we look like when we don't have to worry about working and we don't have to worry about our rent? Who are we when we're not worrying about paying a mortgage? I think that using tech the right way frees us up to explore who we actually are. And that's probably what's not wanted for us to have space for rest, because rest is revolutionary. If we rest enough, we have enough power, we have enough brain space to challenge governments. And that's possibly one of the most dangerous things they think we can do.
Kelechi Okafor, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on The Tea. You being with us means the world to us. If you thought today's conversation was useful, subscribe now and join us on Patreon. Your support keeps this independent platform alive and these vital discussions flowing. Until next time, stay critical, stay connected, and keep pushing for a kinder world for all. Thanks for watching The Tea. Please remember to like and subscribe. And if you've made it this far, why not keep going and check out this episode?